What is going on, everyone? So in this week's video, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned from running over the past year or so that I think really does apply towards photography. So for the past year, my alarm clock has gone off at 4:53 a.m., which is definitely pretty early, but I'm very much a morning person naturally. If I think back to when I was in college, there'd be times when I had like a big exam the next day. And some people were really good at, cramming at the last minute and just, learning everything they do, just reading everything, taking everything in. That never really worked for me. I found that after about 9 p.m., my mind just didn't really work very well. But that being said, in the morning, it worked really well. So I've really enjoyed getting up early for a while, but the whole getting up really early, that started maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, somewhere in about that range. And it all started because I didn't really have enough time in the day to kind of work on all the various projects I needed. So I ended up getting up pretty early so I can work on, answering emails and various other things I was working on, video editing, stuff along those lines. And then I think it was in like July of 2018 that I was up early, I was working on something. I felt a little restless. So I felt like, I'm just gonna go out for like a run or something like that. Now here's the thing, up until that point, I never enjoyed running. It was not anything that I ever looked forward to doing. It wasn't anything I ever really did. But there's something about that time where I just felt like it was just something I really needed to pursue. And so I kind of set up, I went on Google Earth and kind of found a course that was about like a mile or so through the neighborhood. Went out for a run and learned that I was definitely not very good at running, but it was something I wanted to get better at. And even though that first run was horrible, I felt really good afterwards. It felt like I had some degree of a sense of accomplishment, and that kind of carried through the rest of the day. So it became something I got a little bit excited about, just going for that really, really early morning run. So I looked up for a course that'd be like 1 mile, then 2 miles and 4 miles, and started setting goals as far as, what I wanted to accomplish with the morning runs. So the first obstacle I ran into, it was in probably late July or so. Now, during that time of year here in San Diego, we have these red orb weaver spiders. So big spiders, they create these big webs, and the webs are always pretty much exactly at eye level as I'm walking or running. And so I learned a very important lesson, which was never to run between trees when it's well before sunrise and you can't see anything out there, because you're most likely going to end up with a red orb weaver spider in your mouth and on your face. And that was pretty much a nightmare. That really wasn't something I would care to relive. But one of the little things I kind of learned as I started going towards jogging. Then it was maybe like a week later or so when I was out for my morning run, still trying to get that first mile and still hadn't got it yet. And it's probably about a half mile into the run. I was feeling pretty good. Then I tripped on the sidewalk and I fell and skinned my knee pretty bad, skinned my elbow pretty bad. And it was one of those things where I thought I was in decent shape. So I decided I'm just gonna man up a little bit and kind of keep running. And I made it about 2 houses. Then I started getting a little dizzy, and I think at that point my body said, no, you're gonna sit down for a little while. So I sat on the curb for a little bit, kind of made sure everything was okay, and then just kind of walked back home. So from that, I definitely learned to never run on the sidewalk, and I also learned that I am a complete wuss. And I had these visions that if I'm on a trip, I break a leg, I'm gonna take my trekking poles and some gaffer tape and put it all together and hike back. And yeah, now I know that that's not gonna happen. But yeah, you kind of learn a little something about your body in the process as well. But I eventually made it the full mile, and then after that, I made it 2 miles. And it was about that time when the seasons were starting to change. So now it's kind of getting into September, October. It started to get a little cooler in the morning. And so there was one morning I went out for a jog, and then it got a little uncomfortable after a while. And it was at that point that I realized that the chafe is real. So after that, I decided to get some Band-Aids, put them on the old man badges there in the morning. And that certainly kind of helped out. So there's all these little things kind of along the way, these little bits and pieces of the puzzle you kind of learn as you're going through it. By that point, I was able to then run 4 miles, which is pretty cool. And pretty much all through the winter. That was my normal route, 4 miles, 4 miles, 4 miles. But then when I tried to push beyond 4 miles and try to run 6 miles in the morning, it just wasn't happening. I was just absolutely worn out after 4 miles, and it seemed like no matter what I did, it just wasn't really happening. But then I had a little bit of a different approach. So I still ran my 4 mile route, but this time on that last mile, I pushed myself really hard. I would go sprinting at times. I would kind of just try to push myself running up hills and everything along those lines. And then the next time I tried to run 6 miles, it was no big deal. It worked. And I think it was really just because I was pushing myself even further that allowed me to extend my range out to about 6 miles, which is currently kind of where I am right now. There's this big hill near my house, and it's about a half mile to go up this hill. And it starts kind of gradually get steeper and steeper as you go up. Now, when I first got into running back in the summer of 2018, one of my goals was to be able to run continuously up that hill. And I made it about a third of the way, maybe halfway on a good day. But then I really didn't try to run that hill for a while, up until maybe even a couple weeks ago. So it's been over a year now, and decided to try that hill and just ran right up it, no problem. And that's just because of all the training I kind of have been putting in the day out of it all. And so it kind of gives you a sense of perspective as far as where I came from to kind of where I am now. So let's talk about some of the lessons I've learned from running and how it applies to photography. So the first thing I learned is that you get out of running or photography the sum of what you put into it. Hard work will pay off with time, but it's important to push yourself. Kind of like when I was trying to go from 4 miles to 6 miles, I was only able to do it after working really hard on that 4th mile and sprinting, running uphill, and then eventually I was able to extend my range to 6 miles. You alone are responsible for your own progress. There's no shortcuts, but good things take time. It's important to work really hard at it to kind of push yourself to extend your own range. The second thing I learned is it's important to set and to achieve measurable goals. Now, this is pretty easy with running. You set a goal for 1 mile, then 2 miles, and 4, then 6. Now I'm kind of working on my pace. So you have these very concrete goals that I work on. But when you achieve them, it feels really, really good. Now, with photography, this is a bit more abstract. You can think about it in terms of long-term or in terms of short-term. With long-term, it's kind of where do you want to be with your photography in, say, 1 year or in 5 years. In my case, I really would love to do this full-time, so I'm working really hard at it to kind of go in that direction, and things are kind of working out pretty well in that regard. But I think it's a lot easier to think about it in terms of the short-term. So every time when I go on one of my photo trips, I have these big ideas, these big goals for things that I want to accomplish when I'm out in the field. And once I get out in the field, I kind of forget about it all. So what I've taken to doing is bring a notebook with me. I write down these goals that I have before going on the trip. Places I want to explore, things I want to photograph, things I have in mind as far as subjects that kind of intrigue me and want to see if I can find. I write them all down and I bring that notebook with me. That way when I'm out in the field, I won't forget about these things because I have a way of sort of doing that on every single trip. So I think that's a really important thing to do is write down those goals because that really does help out quite a bit. The third thing I've learned is, like many things in life, some of the best things for us are not great in the moment, but they feel great afterwards. So in terms of running, if I'm out at 5 in the morning, if I'm running uphill on a frosty morning before sunrise, that itself is not really enjoyable. But the feeling afterwards, when I get back, home, I'm kind of relaxing, that is what makes it all worthwhile. The sense of accomplishment, but also just the physical feeling of having done that and starting out the day on a very, very good note. Now, with photography, same sort of thing applies. If you're hiking up a sand dune in the morning only to set up your camera and have that light never really do anything, that doesn't feel great. There's lots of moments where things just kind of fall short and it's not great. But when things do work out, it's fantastic. And I think there's a portrayal in social media where everything is epic. People only post their best work. They don't talk about their struggles. They only talk about things when they work out for the best. But the truth is that that's not reality. Most of the time, things aren't going to be absolutely amazing in the moment. It's kind of a sugar-coated for mass consumption. Donuts are great in the moment. But what about afterwards? Not quite so much. The truth is that both photography and running can be very difficult at times. But much like eating broccoli, it may not be great in the moment, but it will feel really good about it afterwards. And then the fourth and final thing that I've learned is that you will never be the best. Someone will always be better than you, but you should find your own personal best. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not really interested in contests or competitions. I have no desire to run a marathon. I have no desire to compete in a photography competition. I just don't really gain anything from that. I think it's important to set your own goals, to follow your own path, because oftentimes the road less traveled is much more rewarding in the end. I think it's also one of the reasons why I typically avoid iconic scenes. I'd rather go off and kind of find my own areas. And especially that road less traveled is kind of nice when it's 5 in the morning, it's before sunrise, and there's a kind of a narrow shoulder as you're riding along the road. But I want you guys to avoid those spiders. They do not taste great. And we'll see you around next week.